Hi everyone, it's Katie with Rosie Riveters, and I'm here for another episode of Rosie Reads. This week we're talking all about math, so what better book than The Girl with a Mind for Math, The Story of Raye Montague, written by Julia Finley Mosca and illustrated by Daniel Rieley. Now, as always in Rosie Reads, I'm going to ask you two questions for you to think about while I'm reading. The first one is, what challenges did Raye face on the way to becoming an engineer? And then the second question is, and it goes with the first, is how did Raye become an engineer? So think about those while we're reading and we'll get started. The Girl with a Mind for Math. If there's something you want, but it seems out of reach, here's a story for you, a great truth it will teach. When you focus your mind, you'll succeed through and through, like one bold engineer by the name Montague. In a state we call Arkansas, one winter day, a baby was welcomed, a girl they called Raye. She was bright as a star, super smart from the start. She was headstrong, this child, and not faint of heart. Yes, this girl had potential. Her granddad was proud. He told her, work hard, you'll stand out from the crowd. Then something she'd cherish, when Raye was just 7, he took her to see her first ship. It was heaven. A real submarine, her eyes opened wide. Who made it, she asked, as they followed the guide. Engineers, said the man, giving Raye's head a pat. But my dear, you don't need to know all about that. At the time, the man's insult went over her head. No, you can't, were the words he had meant, but not said. Engineering, thought Raye, and her life's dream began, except most people laughed when she told them her plan. Stay strong, said her mom. Use your brains. You'll be fine. There will always be people who pay you no mind. Just because you're a girl and because you are black, don't let them or the state of your school hold you back. You see, schools in those days were what's called segregated. The black and white students were kept separated. That's wrong, you exclaim. It was dismal, no fooling. And worst of all, white kids received better schooling. But Raye studied hard. She had grit, taught herself. She was gifted in math and read books by the shelf. When the time came for college, she knew what to choose. She'd learned to build boats, but she got some bad news. Engineering's not taught to black students, they said. Her heart hit the floor. I'll take business instead. She'd learn what she could, and she'd learn the rest later. The rules were unjust, but that school wouldn't break her. Raye finished with honors. Oh boy, what a smarty. She said her farewells. There was no time to party. I'm off to a place filled with history's greats, the capital city of all 50 states. Now, finding a job, it turned out that took time. She looked and she looked. Raye was not one to whine. Then it must have been fate, or at least that's what it seems. She was hired to type where they built submarines. The Navy, that's right. Oh, but hold all of your cheers. Ship designing was only for trained engineers. So she watched as they worked and she learned every task, even studied computers by night in a class. Then her big break arrived. The whole staff got the flu. Raye did all of her work, and the engineers too. Her boss was in shock. How? He exploded. From memory, said Raye, and with that, got promoted. Life should have been swell, yet that wasn't the case. Her boss treated her poorly because of her race. Many people like him tried to make her feel small. Raye just held her head high, and she outworked them all. What next? From the White House there came a command. The president ordered a ship. Make it grand. And quickly, he added. Well, that didn't fly. All those plans would take engineers months to supply. Here's the thing about that. When designing a boat, there are thousands of measurements one needs to note. All those numbers take math, and that takes some time. But Raye had been working on something sublime. She took a deep breath. "I can solve this," she said. "I've come up with a system to do it instead. It'll draw the plans faster," she told them. "Don't fret. I'll design the first ship by computer. No sweat." How long do you think that might take? What's your guess? Would it take her a month? Maybe weeks for success? Well, it took calculations and tons of caffeine, but Raye finished in hours, just over 18. Her program, it worked. All the blueprints were done. The ship was constructed. The engineers stunned. "You did it," they cheered, and her boss had to say that her quick mind for math had in fact saved the day. The end? No, not quite. When Raye's ship was unveiled, only white men could go, and Raye's invite not mailed. Say what? You heard right. No invite? Abhorrible. In fact, some might say it was downright deplorable, and I think I agree. She should have been able to go. She designed the ship. Yet Raye kept her cool, gave her best every day, and in time, all her skills were applauded. Hooray! People learned of her work. "Who's this Raye?" they'd demand. When they met her, they stared. They expected a man. Yes, that happened a lot. Many could not believe that a woman of color did all she'd achieved. Some even thought Raye was a maid. Sad but true. When they ordered a drink, she'd say, "Bring me one too." All her humor and wit served her well through the years as she battled the hard times with laughs and not tears. And that boss in the Navy who'd been so unkind made Raye the first woman to lead ship design. More honors would follow, her fame picked up steam, and finally, at last, she accomplished her dream. That title she'd worked for, an engineer, score! Now the world knows her feats. She is hidden no more. So the lesson to all is don't ever give in. Take a chance, rock the boat. If it sinks, you can swim. When a storm comes your way, hold your course and don't stress. Never quit, and like Raye, propel straight to success. The end. Now remember, I asked you to think about two things while we were reading. And the first one was, what were some challenges that Raye faced on her way to becoming an engineer that designed ships for the Navy? And she faced a lot of them. Remember, when she was young and she was going to school, her schools were segregated. And what that means is that the black children went to one school and the white children went to another. And oftentimes the white schools had better resources, better teachers, so the education was more academically rigorous. So that was one challenge she faced. When she got to college, she was told that she couldn't study engineering because she was black. They didn't teach engineering to black students. And then once she had finally achieved her dream of designing a ship, she wasn't allowed to go to the unveiling because she was a black woman. So a lot of these challenges came from the fact that she's black and that she was a woman. And those things are things she had no control over. And that's why racial and gender discrimination are so wrong. There's nothing that she could do to change. So that's why it's so important that we learn about these things, recognize them, and point them out where they exist in society today. Because as we learned from Raye's story, it's not fair. Now, the other thing that I asked you to think about while we were reading is how did Raye learn engineering? Because remember, she wasn't allowed to study it in college. And she really took it upon herself to teach it to herself. She read all the time. She took computer classes after work at night. And she even worked long into the night after work for free so she could learn more and more and more. And all these obstacles, she just found her way around them. And that's the really inspiring thing about her story, and her as a person. As she encountered them, she always kind of made it funny. She found the humor in it and really tackled the challenges head on. Remember when someone mistook her for a maid and asked her for coffee, she said, "Hey, I'll take a coffee too." Or when her boss told her that she couldn't work at night by herself, she brought her mom and her son, so she wasn't by herself anymore. So she's a really inspiring figure, and I encourage you to learn more about her story. Check this book out from the library. There's a lot in the back. You can learn more about her. Give her a Google. She's a really fun person to get to know electronically and through books. So our Rosie Reads activity this week has to do with math. So as the book talks about, Raye figured out how to program a computer to do the ship's measurements for the ship that she was building. And that saved her a ton of time because the computer was doing the calculations. And we use calculators all the time to do simple math, simple arithmetic like adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. But the computing age has only been around for, 60, 70 years. What did people do to solve these problems before we had computers, before we had calculators? So I want you to do some research. Again, look on the computer, check some books out from the library, and look into early technologies for math, and you're gonna find some really cool things. So ask questions like, how did people add, subtract, multiply, and divide really big quantities before they had computers? How did they keep track of those numbers? How did they take measurements for buildings and ships? What tools did they use? How did they make sure the calculations were right? How did they draw a map? How did they measure miles? How did they make sure the map was to scale? There are all kinds of cool technologies people invented on the way to computers, and I'm really excited for you to discover them, and I hope you'll share them in the comments with us too. So thanks for joining us for Rosie Reads this week. Make sure you come back on Friday where we're going to be using math to make mechanical flowers, super cool, and we're going to talk more about the Fibonacci sequence. So I hope to see you then. Bye!